Hello. In that village, bread was everything: food, reward, comfort, and the last hope for survival. But one day, after a mysterious wanderer appeared, bread became dead. No matter how much the villagers ate, their hunger only grew, filling not just their stomachs, but their souls with despair and fear. But before you get comfortable, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm really curious to see who has joined us. Now, settle in. We're about to begin. You wake up to the sound of chickens, not because you like chickens, but because everyone else in the village says you should appreciate the rhythm of their cackling. The straw in your bed, despite being painstakingly replaced by your mother not 2 weeks ago, already manages to poke you in inconvenient places. Dawn leaks through the crooked shutter, lighting up a scene that would be familiar to any time traveler with a preference for low expectations. Your first thought is not of love, nor even of the weather, but of bread. In this village, bread is not just food, it is routine, sustenance, entertainment, gossip, insurance, politics, and, on occasion, a form of revenge. You reach for the loaf you set aside last night, half expecting the mice to have performed their own midnight tax. But no, it is whole, one of the few miracles this village ever witnesses. You sniff it, trying to discern whether today will be a good day. You think of the stories old Matrona tells about how, when bread smells sour, the village will soon know tragedy. But today it smells only of warmth and yeast. If you had more ambition, you might be disappointed by how unremarkable your breakfast promises to be. As you gnaw on your bread, you listen for the first shouts from the neighbor's yard. They come as surely as sunrise. The old men are arguing again, this time about whether the last harvest was the worst in living memory or merely the worst in 40 years. You find this comforting. In a world that changes with a terrifying slowness, people's ability to complain never falters. Today is bread day, which in the village is almost every day. By noon, the communal oven will be a glowing heart, and the air will thicken with the scent of crust and ash. You remember how, as a child, you watched the older women knead dough with hands both soft and calloused, the flour rising around them like mist. You once thought they looked like magicians, summoning loaves from nothing. Now you know it is mostly patience, muscle, and the endless repetition that makes life feel both safe and claustrophobic. You put on your only clean shirt, clean here, meaning not caked in visible mud, and step outside. The village is already bustling, though nobody moves quickly. People like to claim it is because haste leads to mistakes, but in reality, it is simply because nobody has ever figured out how to move quickly in these boots. The first person you meet is Ivan, who always claims to have a sore back, except when free bread is offered. He tells you, with great seriousness, that he has seen a fox in the woods with the eyes of a man. You nod, the correct response to any village tale. Ivan is disappointed by your lack of horror, so he repeats himself, adding that perhaps the fox is a sign sent by the saints, or perhaps a sign of nothing at all. The baker's cottage sits at the center of the village, and as you walk toward it, the smell of bread intensifies. You have heard people in cities say that bread is just bread. Clearly, those people have never been hungry, nor have they known the dread of a winter with too little rye. Here, bread is hope pressed into a loaf. You see old Anna kneading with the precise boredom of a person who knows the shape of every blister on her own hands. You help her carry wood to the oven, which wins you a nod and, more importantly, a hot crust. It burns your fingers, but you would rather lose a fingertip than let go. In this moment, as you chew, you feel that the world is exactly as it should be, a little dull, a little rough, but with just enough comfort to make you think you might survive another day. You listen to Anna and the other women discuss the latest news, which is, as always, exactly the same as yesterday's news, only with different names. There is talk of a new tax, but nobody believes it will reach your village. There is worry about wolves, but so far, the only confirmed victim is a pig that was suspected of being ill tempered anyway. You hear, too, the first rumors of a stranger, a figure seen at the edge of the forest, walking slowly, leaning on a stick, neither young nor old, but somehow out of place. Anna says she saw the shape from a distance, but the mist distorted everything. The oven hisses as Anna tosses in the first batch of dough. You sit, picking crumbs from your shirt, feeling the warm heaviness of bread in your belly. If you are honest, this is the closest you come to happiness. You notice as the morning fades that the village is never truly silent. There are always footsteps, voices, the clatter of something breaking in someone's shed. The village lives in cycles, waking, baking, eating, arguing, sleeping, always returning to the start. Sometimes you wonder if you will ever leave, but then you think of the bread and you remember why you stay. As dusk approaches, you watch the village prepare for the night. Fires are stoked, animals herded into makeshift pens. Children are called home with threats of missed suppers. You retreat to your hut, another loaf at your side, and think about the day. Nothing has changed. Nothing ever changes. But in the shadows, at the edge of the forest, you think you see a shape moving, just for a moment, before it is swallowed by the night. You tell yourself it is only your imagination. After all, in a village like this, imagination is both the only escape and the most dangerous enemy. You eat your bread. You listen to the silence between the usual sounds. You wait for sleep and for tomorrow to arrive with its fresh promise of more bread, more stories, and the uneasy certainty that even the most ordinary days can begin with a whisper and end with a shadow. You rise before the sun, if only because the geese have decided that morning must come early today. Outside, the village is a study in gray, the thatched roofs slick with dew, the dirt path still soft from last night's rain, the distant woods brooding in their usual, unhelpful way. You pull your boots on with some difficulty. They were your father's once, and now they are yours only by the unbreakable logic of inheritance. They have never truly fit. Bread day, the villagers say, comes as often as you need it and never quite as often as you want it. Today, though, the promise of new loaves is enough to lure you to the center of things. You pass the goat pen, one goat missing, but nobody bothers to count this early in the morning and catch up to a procession of yawning neighbors already making their way to the baker's. Every other face is familiar enough to greet without real enthusiasm. You wave at Marfa, who always pretends to forget your name and insists on giving you advice about your posture. She is dragging a sack of barley, mumbling about how even the chickens seem to eat better than people these days. The bakery is the busiest place in the village by a wide margin, not because the people here are ambitious or greedy, though truthfully, both traits crop up more often than anyone would admit, but because bread is the only thing that reliably brings people together without violence. The oven is already alight. Anna, the baker, has flour on her nose, her hair, her apron, and possibly, you suspect, on her soul. You help her haul a fresh bucket of water, and she rewards you with a crust that has been broken off by accident, or so she claims. You stand in line with the others, waiting for your turn at the loaf. Everyone watches the rising dough with the reverence reserved for small miracles. Old women cross themselves, younger men try to look nonchalant, and the children are shooed away from the hot bricks with warnings about burned fingers and bad luck. The air is thick with anticipation and also with gossip. Today's gossip is as predictable as the weather and just as likely to change without notice. The harvest was bad, the priest's sermon was worse, and somebody's cow has been looking at people in a suspicious manner. But beneath these usual complaints is a new story, passed from mouth to mouth, growing stranger with each retelling. It started 2 nights ago, says Andre the miller's boy, when he saw someone walking at the edge of the fields. Not a villager, not one of the peddlers who come once a season to sell pins and colored thread. No, this one was different. Tall, wrapped in a coat too fine for such muddy roads, moving with a deliberate slowness, as though he measured every step against some invisible map. You, being blessed with neither curiosity nor imagination, are content to listen without believing. But the others are not so cautious. By the time Anna has finished shaping the first loaves, the story has grown. Now the stranger carries a staff carved with odd symbols, speaks to the dogs in a voice they understand, and leaves no footprints in the morning mud. Someone swears they saw the stranger at the well, though the well has been dry for weeks. Another insists the newcomer was seen at the crossroads at midnight, though nobody in the village has been at the crossroads after sunset in living memory. Anna herself, practical to a fault, shakes her head at all this nonsense. Strangers come, strangers go, she says, slapping dough against the table. If he brings coins, let him buy bread. If he brings trouble, let him eat it. The others laugh, though not quite as loudly as usual. You accept your loaf and wander to the edge of the crowd, chewing thoughtfully. The bread is still warm and, for now, still filling. You watch as a few braver souls drift toward the woods, searching for any sign of an unfamiliar face. It is remarkable how quickly people can become interested in something, provided that something is not their own work. By midday, the village is abuzz with the tale. The smith's apprentice declares he saw the stranger's shadow move against the barn, though the barn faces away from the sun. A shepherdess claims her dog barked all night, but only at the empty road. Someone suggests the stranger must be a saint in disguise. Another mutters about devils, and a third wonders aloud if all strangers are simply villagers from elsewhere, tired of their own neighbors and looking for new ones to tolerate. You spend the afternoon watching the clouds drift overhead, half listening to the stories that swell and fade around you. There is a comfort in knowing the day will end much as it began, with bread in your stomach, the smell of wood smoke in your hair, and the same complaints echoing around the village square. But as evening falls, you notice something unusual. The children, usually loud and impossible to corral, are playing close to home, glancing nervously toward the tree line. The old men, who never admit fear, gather in twos and threes by the fire, speaking in low voices. Even Anna, sweeping the bakery floor, seems distracted, glancing at the window more often than her broom would require. You find yourself thinking about the stranger, not as a figure of legend, but as a real person, flesh and blood, footsteps and hunger. What brings someone to a place like this? What do they seek, if not bread, warmth, or the dull safety of routine? The more you try to imagine his face, the less you are able to recall the faces of those around you. That night, as you lie on your cot, listening to the wind rattle the shutters, you remember the stories told at the oven. You wonder if the stranger will come while you sleep, and if so, what you will offer him: bread, welcome, or simply another rumor to carry with him on the road. The village quiets at last, the dogs curling up by the hearths, the chickens settling on their roosts. You close your eyes, but for a long time you do not sleep, listening for the sound of footsteps outside your door. It is, after all, a peculiar thing how quickly a stranger can become part of the village, and how easily a story, once begun, refuses to be forgotten. You awaken, as always, to the music of everyday chores, the chopping of wood, the scraping of buckets, the low musical hum of Anna's oven being fired anew. The world is a tapestry of repetition, but today a faint tremor ripples through the fabric. Perhaps it is the dream you cannot recall, or the way the sunlight seems a little too pale on the packed earth outside your door. Your day begins like all the others. You check the loaf you set aside for breakfast, which now sports a gnawed corner, courtesy of some brave or foolish mouse. You consider cursing the mouse, but decide to respect its ambition. After all, survival is the common religion of this village. As you tear at your bread, you overhear new snippets of conversation drifting through your window. The word stranger is repeated so often you might believe the village itself is trying to summon him by sheer willpower. Some say he was seen by the river, staring at his own reflection. Others claim he spoke to the wind in a language only the crows understood. Each telling is stranger than the last, but you are practical. If there is a stranger, he will appear. If there is not, there will still be chores, and a surfeit of words does not plow a field or mend a fence. So you set off to repair the broken gate at the edge of your small, stubborn patch of land. The dew has not yet dried, and your boots, always slightly too large, squelch in the mud. It is there, as you fumble with a knotted length of twine, that you see him. At first, you think your eyes are playing a trick. He is standing by the road, not so far away that you can mistake him for a tree or a scarecrow, not so near that you can greet him without crossing a boundary you have never crossed before. His cloak is an uncertain color, perhaps gray, perhaps blue. It moves with the breeze in a way that suggests it has never known dust or hard labor. He carries a staff, gnarled and smooth at the same time, as if it grew that way just for him. The stranger does not seem to notice you, or perhaps he chooses not to. He stands perfectly still, looking out over the village as though weighing it in the palm of his hand. His face is partially hidden by the shadow of his hood, but you glimpse a mouth set in a faint, amused line, and eyes that seem to change color with every blink. A trick of the light, surely, but unsettling all the same. You realize you have been staring. You busy yourself with the gate, but your hands move without thought. The twine slips, your fingers fumble, and you almost drop the last knot. When you glance up again, the stranger has shifted his gaze and is now looking directly at you. For a heartbeat, you are caught. It is not the look of a man meeting another by chance. It is the look of someone who expected you, perhaps has always expected you, as if he knows the inventory of your days and the secret registry of your worries. You force yourself to nod, a gesture that can mean anything, a greeting, a warning, an admission of defeat. The stranger tips his head in return. Then, as if he has made up his mind, he starts walking, not toward you, but toward the village square. His walk is peculiar. He does not hurry, but every step is precise, as if he is measuring the ground beneath him. The staff taps lightly, a sound that echoes longer than it should. You watch as he passes Anna's bakery, and for a moment, Anna herself pokes her head out, a frown forming between her flour dusted eyebrows. She does not call out, but she does not look away either. The village responds in its usual, unspectacular way. Curtains twitch, doors creak on their hinges, children are shooed inside. The stray dog who normally harasses newcomers offers the stranger only a wary glance before slinking away to examine a suspicious potato peel. You, however, remain outside, feeling the cold bite of curiosity in your stomach. You wonder what kind of person walks into a village alone, armed only with a staff, and the sort of silence that demands to be filled with speculation. You wonder what he wants: food, shelter, company, something less nameable. Eventually, your neighbor, old Grigory, wanders over to where you stand. He squints at the road, then at you, and finally at the sky, as if the answer might be written somewhere between the clouds and your face. I suppose you saw him too, Grigory asks, his voice thick with the weight of mornings, just like this one. You nod. He spits, thoughtfully. Odd sort. You think he is a holy man or one of those wanderers who brings nothing but trouble? You shrug. He has not asked for anything yet, you reply, though you are not certain that is entirely true. His glance felt like a request all its own. Together, you and Grigory watch as the stranger disappears around the corner by the well, leaving behind only a faint disturbance in the morning air. The village resumes its slow, stubborn rhythm, but something has changed. There is a new thread woven into the day, thin, dark, almost invisible, but impossible to ignore once you know it is there. The rest of your morning unfolds with the numb predictability of habit. You finish mending the gate. You fetch water, greet Anna, who is unusually terse, and watch as a group of children invents a new game that involves throwing pebbles at shadows. The sky clouds over, threatening rain, and the distant woods seem to huddle closer. You do not see the stranger again that day, but you feel his presence every time you pass a window or catch a glimpse of the empty road. Even the bread at supper tastes different, sharper, heavier, as if it carries a memory not your own. That night, you dream of roads that never end and faces that flicker like candle flames. When you wake, you find yourself listening for footsteps in the silence, certain that something in the village has shifted forever, though nobody will admit it until it is far too late. If a person were to ask you what it means to be a villager here, you would likely shrug, gesture toward your boots and the fields, and, if pressed, finally point to bread. Not to the fields themselves, nor the river, nor even the old church with its crooked cross, but to bread, the answer so obvious it rarely requires saying out loud. Bread is not just what fills your belly, it is the rhythm by which you measure your days. You remember learning as a child how much bread you must eat to quiet your stomach before the first hour of work, how much is needed to sustain you until noon, and how to slice a loaf so that every mouth in the house feels at least a little satisfied. You have your rituals. Everyone in the village does. Some people eat bread in great, wolfish bites, hunched over the table, as if by devouring quickly they might catch the crumbs before hunger does. Others, usually those with fewer teeth, prefer to soak their crust in soup, prolonging the illusion of plenty. For you, bread is a quiet thing, eaten slowly. You tear each piece carefully, savoring the warmth if it is fresh or enduring the chewiness if it is old. You know, almost by instinct, how a loaf ought to feel in your hands, how a heel of bread, even if hard as a rock, can be softened by patience and persistence. After the stranger's arrival, you find yourself thinking more about bread than usual, not in the way of comfort, but as a matter of curiosity, as though you are suddenly alert to something odd in the texture, something new in the ritual. Your morning loaf, yesterday's, just a little stale, tastes fine, but when you finish the last bite, your stomach growls as if you had eaten nothing at all. You check the crust for mold, suspicious of a bad batch, but find nothing amiss except your own unsettled feeling. By midday, the sensation has not faded. Instead, it grows sharper. You fetch a fresh piece from Anna, who remarks that you are eating early. Hungry work, Mending fences, you say, though you cannot remember actually doing much mending. She laughs, but her eyes linger on your face, as if she senses a question you have not yet voiced. The bread she gives you is warm, golden, perfect. It fills your mouth with comfort, but your stomach, somehow, remains empty. You tell yourself you are imagining things. The mind, after all, is a trickster, quick to borrow fear from a story and dress it up as hunger. Still, as the day drags on, you notice others behaving oddly. Marfa, the old woman who can out-eat any man in the village, sits in the shade beside the bakery with a half loaf in her lap, eating and eating, but still scowling. The children, always in search of a second supper, beg Anna for just a little more, even after their usual ration. Anna, flustered, tries to shoo them away, but her movements are less certain than usual. In the fields, the men break for lunch, and you watch as they eat their bread in silence. Someone jokes that the loaves must be smaller this week. Someone else mutters that perhaps the flour is cursed, and this, like most jokes in the village, lands somewhere between humor and prayer. Later, you find yourself with Ivan, who, like most people here, is happiest with food in his hands. He is already well into his second loaf, tearing off chunks and chewing loudly. Strange times, he says between bites. Strange bread. I have not felt full since yesterday. You nod, more to humor him than because you agree. Yet, as the afternoon wears on, a slow, gnawing suspicion takes root. You eat another piece, and another. The hunger dulls for a moment, then returns, sharper than before. It is not the clean ache of an empty stomach, but something stranger, a hollowness that feels as if it sits deeper than your belly, closer to your bones. By evening, the mood in the village has shifted. At supper, the talk is quieter, less argumentative. Even the dogs, who normally cluster by the tables for scraps, look disappointed with what little they are offered. You try to recall the last time you felt truly satisfied after a meal and come up empty. Anna makes her rounds, offering reassurance. Sometimes the new flour needs more salt, she tells one group. Maybe the fire burned a little too hot today, she says to another. But she does not eat her own bread, and that, more than anything, unsettles you. In the quiet moments before sleep, you pick apart the events of the day. Was it always like this uneasy feeling that no matter how much you eat, it is never quite enough? Did the stranger bring it with him, or was it already waiting, a hidden crack in the daily routine? Lying in bed, you press a hand to your stomach and listen. The emptiness is not painful, only persistent, like a memory you cannot shake. You tell yourself it will pass. After all, it is only bread, only hunger, only the endless repetition of days. Still, you wonder, just for a moment, what the stranger eats and whether it ever fills him. That night, your dreams are restless. You chase after a loaf that always remains just out of reach, the crust crumbling in your hands, no matter how carefully you grasp it. When you wake, you are hungry, and in the morning, you will eat your bread as always, and tell yourself that this is the way things have always been. In the days that follow, the village takes on a new kind of quiet. It is not the hush that comes with winter's first frost, nor the tired silence that lingers after a funeral. No, this is the restless quiet of empty bellies and crowded thoughts, a hush that sits atop every conversation like a dusting of ash. You notice it first at breakfast, where the familiar act of tearing a piece from your loaf has become almost mechanical. You chew, you swallow, you wait for the warmth to spread from your gut to your limbs, and then nothing. The hunger remains, as patient and unmoved as the stones in the village well. You are not alone in this. Word travels through the village faster than fire through dry grass. Ivan, usually content to grumble about sore backs and cold mornings, now complains in earnest. 3 whole pieces, and I may as well have eaten a handful of air. He waves the remains of his breakfast like an accusation. Is Anna using less flour? Has someone been stealing from the sacks? Anna, for her part, is not spared suspicion. Her bakery is besieged each morning by villagers who demand more than their share, insisting the loaves are smaller, lighter, less satisfying. She swears, louder each day, that nothing has changed in her recipe. Same flour, same fire, same hands. If you want more bread, you will have to bring more grain, she snaps. But everyone knows the fields were stingy this year, and grain is more precious than gold. The children are the first to grow irritable, their games cut short by complaints of rumbling stomachs. Mothers try to hush them, but the little ones grow wilder with hunger, chasing each other in circles and picking at crumbs as if expecting them to multiply. Old Marfa, never one to hide her thoughts, declares at the village well, something's gone wrong. I eat and never feel full. Even in the famine year, I remember bread sticking to my ribs better than this. Her words hang in the air, and for once, nobody argues. You notice new habits taking root. Meals stretch on longer, as if by lingering over each bite, you might coax some forgotten magic from the bread. Slices grow thicker, then thinner, then thick again, as if someone will discover the perfect measure that finally brings relief. Some villagers sneak a second or third helping, casting furtive glances over their shoulders. Others become stingy, counting their loaves, hiding them away, trading secret bites for small favors. The hunger, however, is stubborn. It becomes the uninvited guest at every table, the topic behind every conversation. People begin to search for answers in superstition. Someone ties a red thread around the bread box. Another burns dried herbs in the kitchen at dusk. The old men, who pride themselves on remembering every calamity to ever strike the village, argue over which saint to blame for this particular misfortune. Even the priest seems nervous, his sermons full of warnings about sin and repentance, as if the emptiness of your stomach is a punishment for your soul. For your part, you try to reason with the feeling. You eat slowly, deliberately, but the hollowness remains. It is not a sharp hunger, the kind that makes you dizzy or lightheaded, but a deeper, more persistent emptiness. You begin to wonder if you have forgotten what it means to be satisfied, or if perhaps you have only ever imagined it. One evening, as the sun slides behind the woods, you catch sight of the stranger once more. He stands at the edge of the village, just beyond the last fence, watching as families gather for supper. You notice that, while he is always present at the periphery, he never eats, never asks for bread, never shares in the ritual that binds the village together. You think about calling out to him, but the words catch in your throat. Instead, you watch as he turns and disappears into the trees. Later, at supper, your neighbor Grigori voices what many have been thinking. It started when he arrived, he says, voice low, eyes darting. Maybe he brought it with him. Maybe he is a curse. The table grows quiet. Someone mutters about witches and omens, but nobody laughs. That night, you dream of bread multiplying endlessly, falling from the sky, filling baskets and cupboards, until the village groans beneath the weight of it all. Yet when you reach out to take a piece, it crumbles to dust in your hands. You wake with your mouth dry and your stomach gnawing, the memory of fullness as distant as summer thunder. In the days that follow, desperation begins to seep into daily life. People hoard scraps, quarrel over rations, cast suspicious glances at their neighbors' plates. Some begin to barter for extra loaves, an egg for a slice, a promise for a crust. Even Anna, who once had a smile for every customer, grows pale and pinched, her hands trembling as she kneads the dough. When asked, she says she hardly tastes her own bread anymore. You find yourself thinking less about the chores left undone and more about how long your stores will last. You begin to dream of other foods, apples, cheese, roasted meat, but wake always to the same hard loaf and the same hollow ache. Through it all, the stranger remains a silent presence. Some mornings you spot him at the edge of the woods, other times near the old well or the churchyard. He never lingers long, and he never asks for bread. But wherever he stands, the air seems a little colder, the silence a little deeper. The village, once full of routine and reassurance, now feels fragile, as if a single wrong step might send it tumbling into chaos. You watch, you wait, and you eat your bread, more of it than ever before, and always, always hungry. A week has passed since the hunger began to gnaw through the village like a rat through a sack of grain. Each day seems grayer than the last. The weather has changed, though you are not sure exactly how. The air feels heavier, as if it carries a secret. Everyone is thinner. Some have become sharp with their words, others dull and glassy eyed, as though their thoughts, like their bodies, have grown light enough to float away. Superstition flourishes where certainty fails. In the square, you overhear theories that grow wilder with each retelling. Ivan claims that Anna has angered the local saints by cutting corners with the yeast. Anna insists that Ivan simply has worms. The priest mutters about penance, his eyes dark and sleepless, but few listen. Prayers will not fill a belly, says Marfa, and spits on the church steps for good measure. In the evenings, you often see a small gathering outside the hut of the oldest woman in the village, known to all as Babushka Praskovia. She is a legend in her own right, though she has not left her home in years. It is said she remembers a time before the great flood, before the stone cross fell, before even the oldest among you was born. Some say she knows the name of every spirit, every sorrow, every secret the earth has tried to bury. On the rare occasion when someone is truly desperate, it is to her they go. Today, you are desperate. You arrive at her door as twilight settles on the roofs, your hunger a persistent throb in your belly. Others are already waiting. Marfa, who chews constantly but never swallows. Stephen, who used to laugh at ghosts but now stares at the ground, haunted by the rattle of his own empty stomach. The line moves slowly, as each person is permitted only a few minutes in the darkness within. When your turn comes, you duck through the low door and into a world thick with shadows and old smoke. Praskovia sits by the stove, bundled in layers of rags, her face a map of every winter the village has ever known. Her eyes are bright and unsparing. Well, she says, her voice dry as twigs. You hesitate, then blurt. The bread does not fill us. Not me, not anyone. We eat, but still we hunger. Praskovia grunts. So you have noticed at last. I wondered how long it would take. She leans closer. Her breath smells faintly of nettles and moldy apples. Tell me, when did it begin? You think back. Not long ago, since the stranger arrived. At this, she cackles, a sound sharp enough to snap kindling. Strangers always bring trouble, but some troubles are older than any wanderer. She reaches into a sack at her feet and pulls out a twist of dried herbs, which she tosses into the stove. The smoke turns sweet and heavy. You think hunger is a new thing? Hunger lives here, always. Sometimes it sleeps, sometimes, when spirits are restless, it wakes. Spirits, you repeat, uncertain whether to laugh or shiver. Everything here has a spirit. Bread, fields, oven, even you, Praskovia says, her gaze pinning you like a beetle on a pin. When the balance is lost, when anger or envy or some old sorrow grows too large, the spirits grow thin and hunger follows. Or perhaps a stranger carries more than dust on his boots. Sometimes those who walk between worlds bring hunger with them just to see who survives. You ask what can be done. She shrugs, a mountain settling into its own shape. Restore the balance, feed the right spirits, find the root of the trouble and dig it out. Or, and here her eyes glint, prepare to learn how little you can live on. You want to protest, to ask for some concrete advice, but Praskovia only gestures for you to leave. Bring a crust of bread next time. The oven spirits like gifts, she adds, almost as an afterthought. And tell Anna to stop watching the shadows. It makes them bolder. You leave the hut with more questions than answers. Outside, the others crowd around, hungry for hope, for solutions, for anything that might fill the emptiness gnawing at their ribs. You repeat Praskovia's words. Some nod, as if comforted, others scoff, certain that nothing but more bread will help. That night, you notice the old habits returning. Anna hangs a horseshoe above her oven. Ivan whispers apologies to the rye before he grinds it. Marfa offers the first crumb of every loaf to the wind, just in case something out there is hungry too. Still, the hunger persists. You eat your supper with careful reverence, almost as if performing a ritual yourself. The bread is tasteless, its weight insufficient. As you chew, you remember the look in Praskovia's eyes, hard, ancient, and utterly unsurprised by your troubles. Before you sleep, you set aside a piece of bread near the window, unsure whether you are feeding spirits or merely hedging your bets. The night is darker than usual, full of unfamiliar noises. You dream of empty tables and of shadows at the edge of the woods, watching, waiting, hungry as you are. When you wake, the bread you left out is gone. You cannot say whether it was taken by mouse, bird, or something older. Still, you feel the faintest flicker of hope, a hope so slight it might be mistaken for hunger itself. You would think that by now the village would have exhausted every possible explanation for its relentless hunger, but people are nothing if not creative when desperate. The longer the emptiness lingers, the more elaborate the attempts to chase it away. Now, every meal becomes a kind of performance, half necessity, half superstition, and always tinged with a fear that no one wants to name out loud. It begins with the simplest gestures. Marfa, who never cared for manners, now bows her head before breaking bread. Anna traces a circle in the flour before kneading, muttering words learned from her grandmother and forgotten by everyone else. Ivan insists the oven must not be opened while the wind howls, or the loaves will rise hollow. You find yourself tapping the loaf twice against the table before tearing off a piece, though you could not say why. These rituals multiply. Some are borrowed from neighboring villages, crossing yourself before the first bite, scattering salt on the doorstep, hanging dried herbs above the oven. Others are invented on the spot. Stepan ties a strip of red cloth around his wrist, convinced it will ward off hollow spirits. The children, given no better answers, place pebbles around their plates in careful circles, as if stones can fill what bread cannot. None of these acts seem to help. If anything, they only highlight how deep the unease has sunk. Every failure to feel full becomes an omen. Every ache is a warning. The dogs, too, grow restless, whining at doors and refusing to eat crusts that would once have been a treat. The stranger is never far from anyone's mind. Even when his name is not spoken, you see him in the way people glance toward the woods or lower their voices when talking about the hunger. He has become part of the village landscape, a shadow that lingers at the edge of every gathering. Anna, always practical, claims to see him watching from the hill at dusk, his staff planted in the ground as if taking root. He never blinks, she whispers, like he is waiting for something to happen. You begin to notice your own habits shifting. You linger longer at the bakery, hoping that today's batch will bring relief. You listen more closely to the stories that circulate, trying to detect a pattern, a clue hidden in the web of fear and tradition. One morning, you join Anna and Marfa as they bless the dough, chanting half remembered prayers. The words feel strange in your mouth, heavy with the weight of forgotten meanings. Some take more drastic measures. Grigory, never one for subtlety, digs up an old horseshoe from beneath his floor and nails it above his door. When you ask him why, he shrugs. My grandfather did it during the Great Blight, said it kept away bad luck. He does not sound convinced. Stepan tries burning juniper branches, filling his house with a smoke so thick it drives out not only the supposed spirits, but also his wife, who takes refuge with her sister for 3 nights. The next morning, Stepan's bread is just as unsatisfying as ever. On the edge of the village, Babushka Praskovia gathers a crowd. She has always claimed to know the old ways, and now her words carry new authority. She demonstrates how to set aside the first slice of every loaf as an offering to the spirit of the oven. The villagers, desperate, comply. Every morning you see small piles of bread left on window sills, on fence posts, at crossroads. By midday, they are gone, devoured by birds, perhaps, or the wind, or something no one wants to name. You participate in these rituals almost without thinking. Tap the bread, mutter a blessing, toss a crumb to the chickens before you eat. It all blurs together, habit and hope, faith and fear. Still, nothing changes. You eat, and the emptiness endures. One night, the village gathers around the communal oven. The sky is thick with clouds, the moon only a rumor behind them. Anna proposes a new ritual, more elaborate than any before. The villagers are to knead the dough together, every family contributing a pinch of flour or salt, a gesture or a prayer. You find yourself among the circle, hands sticky with dough, repeating words you do not understand. The fire roars, casting strange shadows on familiar faces. For a moment, you feel the old sense of community, a warmth that almost disguises the cold ache inside. When the loaves emerge, they are perfect, golden, fragrant, everything bread should be. The first bite is a miracle, the second less so. By the third, the familiar hollowness returns, heavier than ever. Later, as you walk home, you glance back at the edge of the village. There he is, the stranger, half lit by the oven's glow, watching. You think you see him smile, but it could just be a trick of the light. In bed, you try to make sense of it all. The rituals, the superstitions, the endless hunger. Are you feeding spirits or only feeding your own fear? You do not know. All you know is that tomorrow you will try again. New blessings, new prayers, new hopes that this time, perhaps, something will change. But deep down, a part of you suspects that the hunger is not in the bread, nor in the spirits, nor in the stranger. It is something older, something you have carried with you all along. The days grow shorter, and each one seems heavier than the last. By now, hunger is a shadow on every wall, a presence in every conversation. The village becomes restless at dusk. Doors are bolted early, and windows closed against the night air. The old jokes are told less often. Children are called inside with sharp voices, and even the bravest dogs curl up beneath beds. Tonight, you cannot sleep. It is not fear exactly, nor even the gnawing in your stomach. It is something else, a tension, an itch beneath the skin, as if you are waiting for a storm that refuses to break. You toss on your straw mattress, listening to the silence. It is a different silence than before, stretched thin and trembling, as if the whole village is holding its breath. At last, you give up on sleep. You slip on your boots and step outside, drawn by some instinct you could not explain even to yourself. The moon hangs low, swollen and red behind the clouds, its light a dull smear across the fields. The air is colder than it should be. The ground crunches beneath your feet, frost forming where none was promised. You walk through the village, each hut hunched and watchful, each window a wary eye. Your breath is visible, curling away in little clouds. You do not know where you are going. Your feet lead you, as if remembering a path from an old dream. Then you see him. The stranger stands near the crossroads at the edge of the village, half in shadow, half in moonlight. He leans on his staff, still and silent, as if he has been waiting for you. His cloak is darker than the night itself, but there is something about him that catches the eye, a glimmer, a subtle wrongness, as though he is not entirely part of the world you know. You stop, uncertain, a few paces away. He turns his head, and you see his eyes reflect the moon, just for a moment. The wind picks up, carrying the scent of wood smoke and something unfamiliar, sharp and old. For a long while, neither of you speak. You study him, hoping to find answers in his posture, in the shape of his hands, in the way he stands with one foot slightly forward, as if ready to walk away or toward you, depending on how the night unfolds. At last, he speaks. His voice is softer than you expect, rough around the edges, as if unused for many days. You are hungry, he says, not as a question, but as a simple truth. You want to deny it, to claim you are just out for a walk, but the words die in your mouth. Instead, you nod, you look down, embarrassed by the honesty of your need. He watches you with an expression you cannot read, pity, amusement, perhaps something older still. It is a hard thing, he continues, to hunger and not know why, to eat and never be filled. His words feel heavy, as if they settle somewhere beneath your ribs. You are suddenly angry, angry at him, at yourself, at the bread that refuses to do its job. What do you know of it? You snap, louder than you mean to. You, who never eat, who stands in the shadows and watches. Why are you here? The stranger does not answer immediately. He looks out toward the forest, where the trees sway in the moonlight like a crowd of silent witnesses. I have seen many hungers, he says at last. Not all of them are for bread. He steps closer, and you notice for the first time how quietly he moves. His feet do not seem to disturb the frost. Some places, he says, are more than what they appear to be. Some wounds run deeper than fields or bones, and some spirits, when restless, demand more than ritual and prayer. You remember Babushka Praskovia's words: spirits, balance, anger, and envy. You wonder if you should be afraid, but your curiosity is greater. Is it you? You ask. Did you bring this hunger? He smiles, a crooked twist of his mouth, neither warm nor cruel. No, he says, but I have seen it before. It follows where the balance is broken, where people forget what it means to share, to trust, to remember who they are. You frown, stung by the implication. We are villagers. We have always shared. We have always endured. The stranger looks at you, and for a moment his eyes seem ancient, older than the stones beneath your feet. Then you will find your way through this, as you always have. But remember, some things cannot be fixed by bread alone. He starts to walk away, his staff tapping lightly on the road. You are left standing in the cold, the echo of his words ringing in your ears. You want to ask more, to demand an explanation, but the night is thick and heavy, and he has already faded into the darkness. You return to your hut, colder than before, but with a new kind of hunger twisting in your chest, not just for food, but for answers. In the silence, you listen to the night. Somewhere, an owl calls, and the wind rattles the eaves. You lie down, eyes wide open, and wait for morning. You suspect that things will be different now, though you do not yet know how. But you do know one thing: the hunger is no longer just in your belly. It has crept into your thoughts, into your dreams, into the very heart of the village. And it is not finished with you yet. The next day dawns weak and colorless, as if the sun itself has grown weary of watching you suffer. You wake with the memory of last night's encounter pressing at the back of your mind, as persistent and uncomfortable as your empty stomach. The stranger's words echo in your ears, but they give no comfort, only riddles, and the sense that some answer lies just beyond your reach. The village moves sluggishly through its routines, each person dragging behind them the invisible weight of their unsatisfied hunger. Anna hands out bread in silence, her eyes red from sleeplessness. Even Ivan, never one to refuse a free crumb, seems too tired to argue. You eat your usual ration, and, as always, it settles in your stomach like a rumor, present, but never quite substantial. By afternoon, your restlessness overtakes you. You watch the shadows lengthen across the road, your gaze drifting again and again toward the abandoned hovel on the outskirts, the place the stranger has claimed for himself. It was once the property of a family who vanished 2 winters ago, their absence only briefly mourned before necessity reclaimed their home. Since then, the house has squatted at the edge of the village, more rumor than reality, a convenient setting for any tale too strange for daylight. No one visits the place, not even the most desperate scavengers. But now, smoke curls from the chimney, thin and pale. The villagers keep their distance, steering wide of the hovel as if it radiates cold. Curiosity, or something like it, draws you there as twilight falls. You tell yourself it is only to see, only to know, not to confront. The path is rutted and choked with weeds. The closer you draw, the quieter the world becomes, as though the birds and insects have all agreed to hold their breath. The house itself seems smaller than you remember, shabbier, with warped planks and moss smothering the roof. Only the door is new, and it stands slightly ajar, as if inviting a question. You do not knock. Instead, you find a vantage point behind an old woodpile where you can watch unseen. The stranger is inside, moving with deliberate care. You see him light a lantern, its glow flickering against the window glass. Then, to your surprise, he takes a loaf of bread, brown, rough, a typical village loaf, from a cloth sack. He does not cross himself. He does not mutter a blessing. He breaks the bread with steady hands and eats slowly, as if savoring every crumb. You are transfixed. He chews, swallows, waits a long moment, then takes another bite. His movements are calm, almost reverent, and for a fleeting instant, you imagine you can taste the bread with him. How solid it must feel, how simple, how necessary. But then you notice something stranger still. As he eats, the shadows in the room deepen. The lantern flickers, sputters, grows dim. The stranger pauses, looking at the loaf as though searching for something hidden beneath the crust. He tears off another piece, lifts it to his lips, and for a moment his eyes close. It is then you see his face in full for the first time. There is nothing monstrous about it, no fangs or glowing eyes. Yet there is a hollowness there, a hunger that mirrors your own but is older, deeper, wider. His cheeks are sunken, and his eyes, though keen, seem to peer inward rather than out. You shift your weight, and a twig snaps beneath your foot. The sound is as loud as thunder in the stillness. The stranger's head turns sharply. His gaze finds you through the window, direct and unblinking. For a moment, you freeze, caught in the act, half villain, half victim. But he does not call out or gesture for you to come closer. He only looks at you with that same tired hunger. Then he returns to his bread. You slip away, your heart pounding, unsure if you have learned anything at all. You cannot shake the feeling that the stranger's bread is no different from yours, coarse, flavorless, insufficient. Yet he eats it as if it matters, as if the ritual of eating is more important than the hope of satisfaction. You return to your own hut, where a cold crust waits on the table. You tear off a piece and chew it, trying to imitate the stranger's patience, the slow, careful way he honored each bite. You wish you could feel something other than emptiness. That night, your dreams are more vivid than usual. You find yourself stoning in the stranger's house, breaking bread that never disappears, always whole, always unsatisfying. You look across the table and see your own face reflected in his, hungry, expectant, afraid. You wake in the dark, certain now that the hunger is not merely a trick of the body, but a shadow cast over the soul. And somewhere, out beyond the edge of the village, you imagine the stranger eating in silence, keeping vigil with his bread and his unspoken sorrow. By morning, you know you cannot ignore him any longer. Whether he is curse or answer, his hunger and yours are intertwined, two threads knotted together, waiting for someone to pull them free. It is said that hunger sharpens the senses, but in your village, it has only sharpened suspicions. The emptiness is no longer merely physical, it creeps into conversations, turning every word brittle, every glance edged with accusation. There is a new kind of silence now, a silence that listens, that waits for someone to break it with a name. At first, the talk is cautious, carried out in corners and behind cupped hands. The villagers have always been adept at this particular dance, wary of drawing too much attention. But hunger makes people bold, and soon the whispers become mutters, and the mutters become shouts. The old rules of civility, never strong to begin with, begin to unravel. Every day seems to offer a fresh quarrel. Avon, who has always believed in direct action, is among the first to speak openly. It began with the stranger, he proclaims in the square, his voice hoarse from too many sleepless nights and not enough bread. No one went hungry before he arrived. What else do you need to know? He glares around, daring anyone to disagree. Grigory, who has little patience for mysteries, agrees. He does not eat with us, he does not work. He stands and watches and brings nothing but misfortune. Anna, caught between exhaustion and anger, bites her tongue, but the lines on her face deepen each day. Even she is not immune to the pressure. I bake the bread as I always have. If something has changed, it is not in my oven, she insists. But her voice quavers, and people remember. Old grudges surface. Someone recalls that Babushka Praskovia once predicted a year of lean harvests. Another points out that Anna's flour comes from a trader who only appears when the fog is thickest. A third mutters about the family that vanished from the hovel, now occupied by the stranger, their fate never truly explained. Each suspicion is picked up, examined, and passed along like a stone that grows heavier with every hand. Soon, attention turns to the stranger, but not to him alone. Superstition is a weed that spreads quickly, and it does not take long for other targets to emerge. The villagers begin to count those who seem too quiet, too different, too unlucky. Babushka Praskovia finds herself the subject of muttered prayers and nervous glances. Anna's kindness, once taken for granted, is now dissected for hidden motives. Even you feel the weight of eyes lingering too long, searching for some sign of guilt. One night, a group gathers near the well. They do not come to draw water. Ivan, Grigory, and a few others, men who have always seen themselves as guardians of the village's order, stand close together, their voices low and urgent. You are drawn in, not by choice, but by the logic of fear. Someone must be blamed, someone must be responsible. It is the stranger, Ivan repeats. He is a curse. We should make him leave. And if he refuses, asks Marfa, her face gaunt and hard. Then we drive him out, Grigory answers, his fists clenched, or worse. Babushka Praskovia, who has appeared as quietly as mist, interrupts with a rasping laugh. Fools, drive him out, and your hunger will follow you. Curses are not so easily uprooted. Her words are not welcomed. What would you know of curses? Someone sneers. Prascovia shrugs. More than you, it seems. The world is not so simple. If you must blame, look to yourselves. Hunger is not always a gift from outside. The group grows restless. Old anxieties are easier to stoke than new wisdom. Anna tries to speak, but the words catch in her throat. The villagers turn away from the well, dispersing in clusters, their resolve uncertain, but their suspicion unchanged. Over the next days, the atmosphere thickens. People avoid the stranger openly, but others, Anna, Prascovia, even you, are watched with narrowed eyes. Children are kept close to home. Doors are locked before sunset. You notice bread being counted, slices measured, even crumbs accounted for, as if the hunger can be traced, like footprints in snow, back to a guilty party. One afternoon, the tension finally breaks. Ivan corners the stranger in the road, demanding answers. His voice is sharp with fear disguised as anger. What have you done to us? Why do you stay? The stranger looks at him, at all of you, and says nothing for a long moment. At last, he replies, I have brought nothing with me that was not already here. I am only a mirror for what you do not wish to see. His words fall flat, dismissed as trickery or defiance. Ivan spits on the ground. If you will not leave, we will make you leave. But the stranger only nods, as if he expected nothing else. That night, the village seems smaller, the shadows longer, the hunger more insistent. No one eats together anymore. Even laughter, when it comes, sounds brittle and false. You lie awake, listening for voices outside your door, and wonder how much longer you can endure this emptiness, not just of the body, but of trust. You think of the stranger, the way he ate his bread in silence, and wonder if his hunger is any different from yours, or if, perhaps, it has always been the same. Another week passes in the fog of collective hunger and suspicion. It is astonishing, really, how quickly hope wears out when your belly is empty and your neighbors' faces are sour with blame. The villagers, once proud of their stubbornness, now seem to wilt in the face of relentless emptiness. Daily life becomes a theater of failed remedies, with every villager a reluctant actor in scenes they have seen too many times. The rituals, if anything, multiply. Anna, her face drawn and hands shaking, begins to draw strange symbols in flour on her doorstep each dawn. She leaves crumbs for spirits on the bakery windowsill, her lips moving in hurried whispers as she works. The children have taken to tying colored ribbons in the trees, each color a wish for fullness or forgiveness or simply a better dream. Even Ivan, once skeptical of all things supernatural, can be seen muttering a blessing before each meal and spitting 3 times over his left shoulder. Prayers are now an hourly event, led by the priest who stumbles through his own litany with red rimmed eyes and a voice worn thin. The little church fills every evening, never this crowded even at Easter, yet the words feel hollow, echoing from wood and stone and returning emptier than before. Forgive us, the priest intones, and feed us. But even he glances nervously at the ceiling, as if expecting the answer to fall from above in crumbs. Some, in their desperation, try to tempt fate itself. Marfa suggests a feast, reasoning that if the village pretends to abundance, perhaps the spirits will be fooled into mercy. The villagers gather what little they have: the last jar of pickled cabbage, a handful of onions, even a dried apple saved for winter. The bread, as always, is present in abundance. Dozens of loaves lined up on the long table, their smell mocking in its promise. They eat until the crumbs are gone, but it is no use. The hunger remains, deeper and colder, as if every attempt to fill it only makes the emptiness more profound. Anger follows where hope fails. Ivan proposes more direct action. If prayers do not work, perhaps the threats will. He gathers a few of the men and marches to the stranger's hovel at dusk, torches in hand, voices raised in warning. "Leave us," they shout. "Take your curse with you." The stranger steps out into the light, his face calm and unreadable. He listens as they rage, offers no resistance as they circle his house. Finally, he speaks. "You may drive me out if you wish," he says, "but hunger is not a wolf that leaves when the door is barred. It is something you carry inside." This only enrages them more. They throw stones at his door and threaten worse, but the stranger stands his ground, silent as always. Eventually, exhausted, the villagers return home, unsatisfied and more afraid than before. The next morning, the hunger is still there, sharp and insistent, like a wound that refuses to close. Bread is eaten without pleasure, without even the comfort of old habits. The rituals are performed with less faith, the prayers recited with less hope. It is as if the village itself is shrinking, not just in spirit, but in the very space it occupies. You find yourself avoiding neighbors, walking longer paths just to be alone with your empty thoughts. Some villagers grow quiet, slipping into a kind of silent despair. Others become fierce, snapping at children and spouses, their nerves stretched thin by days of want. Fights break out over nothing: an extra crust, a careless word, a look that lingers too long. The unity that once defined the village phrase like a cheap blanket, each thread pulling away from the next. One evening, you see Anna weeping in the bakery, her tears falling onto the dough. You try to comfort her, but she waves you off. "I do everything right," she whispers. "I follow every rule. Why does the bread fail us?" You have no answer, nor does anyone else. Babushka Praskovia remains aloof, her warnings about spirits now met with more resentment than reverence. "If you know so much, why do you not fix it?" someone snaps at her. She only shakes her head, her expression a mixture of sorrow and frustration. Some things cannot be fixed by force. Some wounds must be healed by those who made them. But who made this wound? No one will admit to it, and so suspicion continues to circle the village like a hungry dog. You lie awake each night, listening to the creak of the wind against the walls, the rustle of mice in the thatch, the emptiness inside you gnawing ever deeper. You wonder if this is how it ends, not with a miracle, nor with a curse broken, but with the slow, silent undoing of everything you once thought secure. As the days pass, even your dreams grow thin. You wake each morning less certain that there is an answer or even a reason. All that remains is the ritual: rise, eat, hunger, repeat. A history written in crumbs and empty hands. And through it all, the stranger stays, watching, waiting, unmoved by prayers, untouched by threats, a silent witness to the village's unraveling, and perhaps, though you can barely stand to admit it, the only one who is truly full. You have heard it said that hunger makes every memory taste sweeter. Now, as the emptiness drags on and hope shrivels with each day, the village lives on stories more than bread. The old people tell tales of years when the harvest was so bountiful that grain overflowed from the barns and the air was thick with the scent of baking. Children who once scorned such stories as old folks' nonsense now sit quietly and listen, eyes wide, imagining a world where bread is not just enough, but abundant. You remember your own childhood, the way the kitchen would fill with steam and laughter, the way your mother would pinch your cheek and slip you the warmest, softest slice of the first loaf. You remember how bread felt heavy in your hands, how a meal meant fullness and satisfaction, not just a pause and an endless ache. Every crumb seemed sacred then, not because it was scarce, but because it was shared. Now, the bread is plentiful in number, but hollow in substance. No matter how much you eat, it leaves you as empty as when you began. The ritual of eating has become almost cruel in its mockery, mouths moving, jaws working, the memory of flavor lingering just out of reach. The pleasure has gone out of the act, leaving only the routine behind. As hunger stretches into weeks, people turn more and more to their memories, polishing them like old coins. Anna, for instance, tells you how her mother would let her lick the dough from the bowl on feast days. Grigory, not usually one for sentiment, boasts about the time he ate so much at a wedding he could not stand from the bench. Even Ivan, gruff and loud as ever, softens when he speaks of the year the soldiers passed through and left sacks of flour as thanks for the villagers' help. But beneath these stories is a quieter current, a slow seep of resentment and envy that the hunger has exposed. Each tale of past abundance is a reminder of present lack, and soon the old unity, the pride and suffering together, begins to fracture. There are murmurs now about who has more, who eats better, who is not losing weight as quickly as the rest. Eyes linger too long on Anna's loaves, on Ivan's still round belly, on Marfa's hidden stash of apples, rumored to have survived the frost. Arguments break out over nothing: a misplaced crust, a missing slice, a child caught with sticky fingers. You find yourself watching your neighbors as you never have before, measuring not just their words, but their silences, their hesitations, the way they glance away when asked how much bread is left at home. Trust, always fragile in a place where every season brings new uncertainty, now splinters under the strain. The children are not spared. Once, their laughter filled the square, their games loud and chaotic. Now, they play more quietly, glancing over their shoulders, quick to hoard and slow to share. When they squabble over pebbles and sticks, the adults look away, unable to scold them for behavior they recognize in themselves. It becomes clear that hunger is more than a matter of empty stomachs. It is a question that seeps into every thought. Why do I have less? Who has more? What did I do to deserve this? What did they do? You catch yourself thinking unkind thoughts, resenting neighbors you have known all your life for minor comforts, for secrets you imagine they must be keeping. You are ashamed, but not enough to stop. Anna, exhausted and pale, finally closes her bakery one afternoon, claiming there is nothing left to bake. You find her sitting alone in the empty shop, staring at her hands. I never thought it would come to this, she confides, voice brittle. I always believed we'd pull through together. Now I feel like I'm baking for strangers. You want to offer comfort, but the words die in your throat. Instead, you share a memory, a day when you both chased runaway geese into the stream, then dried your boots by the oven while the whole village laughed at your muddied faces. Anna smiles, but the smile does not last. Around you, families draw their circles tighter. Neighbors become rivals, then enemies, then strangers. Some lock their doors at night. Others hide their stores of bread and dried beans beneath loose floorboards. The hunger teaches everyone new kinds of caution, new skills in secrecy and silence. Through it all, the stranger remains, a distant, persistent shadow at the edge of every memory and every quarrel. Sometimes you see him walking the boundary between village and forest, as if patrolling a border that only he can see. Some say he is searching for something, others that he is waiting for the village to destroy itself before moving on. One evening, as you sit alone with a thin piece of bread, you realize that it is not just hunger that has changed the village. It is the suspicion, the envy, the quiet calculation in every glance. The bread may have lost its magic, but something older, something colder, has taken its place, a kind of famine of the heart. Before you sleep, you try to recall the last time you felt truly full, not just with bread, but with the easy comfort of belonging, of trust. The memory is fading, slipping from your grasp like flour through your fingers. You wonder, as you drift off, if such fullness will ever return, or if the hunger you feel now is only the beginning of a longer, lonelier emptiness. It happens, as these things do, almost quietly, so quietly, in fact, that for a while no one says the word out loud. The village is not unfamiliar with death. It comes every winter, cold and impersonal, slipping in with the frost or the fever, occasionally by misadventure or by old age, which in the village is anything past 50. But this is different. This is not the end of a long, slow decline, nor the expected outcome of an unlucky accident. This is death by something nobody wants to admit is possible, the kind of hunger that gnaws not just the body, but the mind and soul as well. It is Stepan's youngest daughter, only 6 years old. She was never robust, thin, and quiet, eyes too large for her face, always drifting at the edges of the children's games. For days, she grew more listless, refusing bread, then water, then even the sweetened milk her mother coaxed her with. Her mother blames herself, then Anna, then the stranger, then God, anyone and anything but the emptiness that has become the village's new weather. The morning she dies, the news travels slowly, then all at once. You hear it first, in whispers at the well, the hush spreading outward like ripples on a pond. People gather outside Stepan's house, not quite sure what to say or do. No one brings food. There is nothing left to bring. Some weep openly, others turn away, not from lack of feeling, but from the shame of recognizing their own fear in the mother's grief. A small funeral is held, more perfunctory than pious. The priest, exhausted, mutters prayers with shaking hands, his eyes red rimmed and unfocused. The villagers stand in clusters, silent, heads bowed. Anna bakes a small loaf, a gesture more symbolic than generous, and breaks it in half, placing one piece on the child's grave and the other on the family's empty table. You watch Stapin, once the loudest voice at the tavern, now a hollow figure who says nothing, even when Ivan tries to blame the stranger for the death. There is anger in Stepan's eyes, but it is unfocused, as if he cannot decide which direction to throw his grief. After the burial, the village feels smaller, more brittle. If the hunger could take a child, it could take anyone. You see it in the way people look at each other. Every neighbor now a potential mourner, every child a possible next victim. The sense of safety that once clung to the routines of daily life is gone. Fear is the new constant, not just of the stranger or the bread, but of what you might lose next. The villagers gather that evening, but the talk is different now, softer, more desperate. Anna wrings her hands, whispering, "We must do something. We cannot just wait for it to be one of ours." Ivan suggests driving the stranger out again, while Marfa blames Babushka Praskovia for filling everyone's heads with superstitions. No one mentions Anna's bread, not openly, but she hears the accusation in every silence. Babushka Praskovia, for her part, says little. She sits by the fire, her eyes distant, watching the faces of the living as if she already sees them as ghosts. "This is how it starts," she murmurs. "Hunger takes what is weakest first, the rest it takes more slowly." The children, sensing the heaviness, cling to their mothers. The mothers glance nervously at the stranger's hovel and at each other, as if hoping to find a culprit written on someone else's face. That night, you dream of small hands reaching for bread that crumbles into dust. You wake in the dark, your heart beating faster than it should, and listen to the quiet of a village that no longer trusts the morning to bring anything but more loss. The days that follow are even more subdued. Stepan's house becomes a place people skirt around, the sound of his wife's grief leaking through the shutters like a chill. Other children are kept closer now, their faces pinched and watchful, the lightness of play replaced by a new gravity. Bread is eaten more slowly, if at all. Some begin to skip meals altogether, not from discipline, but from a dull acceptance that there is no point. The hunger, it seems, has grown bold. Where once it lived in the gut, now it lives in the air, the eyes, the hesitant voices at the market, and the quick glances passed across the square. It is a presence, nearly visible, as real as the stranger standing by the edge of the fields, watching and waiting. You find yourself thinking about what Babushka Praskovia said. The rest it takes more slowly. You wonder how much more the village can bear, and how many more will be lost before the end. Yet in the hush that settles each night, you realize something else, something you do not dare say aloud. The hunger has not just stolen fullness from your stomach, it is thinning your courage, your kindness, your ability to imagine an end to the famine. It is as if every death, every quarrel, every empty bowl chips away not just at life, but at hope itself. And hope, you begin to suspect, is the most fragile thing of all. In the days after the funeral, a hush settles over the village, but it is not a peaceful silence. It is the hush that follows a breaking point, the pause in conversation when everyone knows the truth, but no one wants to say it aloud. Bread is eaten with more ceremony now than ever, but it no longer carries even the faintest promise of comfort. Children sit at the table with their hands folded, waiting for the adults to finish picking apart every last crumb. The laughter that used to bubble up during supper has vanished, replaced by the steady scrape of teeth against crust. You go about your routines in a kind of trance. You fetch water, you mend a fence that does not need mending, you sweep your threshold so many times that the broom wears thin. You catch yourself staring at your reflection in the well and do not recognize the face that looks back at you, lean, wary, hollow eyed. Hunger, you think, has a way of stealing your shape until all that remains is the echo of what you once were. One evening, when the air is thick with mist and the sky bruised with the threat of rain, you find yourself wandering toward the outskirts of the village. The urge to be alone is stronger than your fear, though fear itself seems dulled now, worn away by days of monotony and nights of uneasy sleep. You see a faint light flickering in the abandoned hovel where the stranger lives, a fragile promise of warmth, or at least of something different. You pause at the threshold, uncertain whether to knock or turn back. Before you can decide, the door opens, and the stranger stands there, lantern in hand, his face half lit, half shadowed. Up close, he seems both older and younger than you remembered. There is a quality to his features that defies logic, as if hunger has shaped him too, but in a way you cannot understand. Will you come in? He asks, his voice quiet and level, with just a hint of something that might be amusement. You hesitate, then nod, stepping inside. The room is sparse. A simple table, a single stool, the battered remains of what might once have been a bed. On the table, a loaf of bread sits untouched, its crust darker than the ones Anna bakes, its shape unfamiliar. The stranger gestures for you to sit. You perch on the stool, the air thick with the scent of smoke, and something indefinably strange. For a while, he says nothing. He watches you with calm, steady eyes, as if waiting for you to speak first. But you are tired of questions that yield only silence, so you say nothing at all. At last, the stranger begins to speak. His voice is gentle, and for a moment you imagine that he could be anyone: a friend, a neighbor, even a lost brother. You are wondering why the bread does not fill you, he says, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. You wonder what curse has been laid upon you, what spirit must be appeased. You nod. The words you had meant to say come tumbling out, as if the door between your mind and your mouth has swung open. Why us? Why now? Why do we eat and eat, but still feel hollow? The stranger smiles, just a small movement at the corner of his mouth. Let me tell you a story, he says, though I suspect you have heard it before, in one form or another. He breaks the dark loaf in half and sets a piece before you. You hesitate, but the habit of hospitality is stronger than suspicion. You accept, tearing off a small bite. The bread is dense, sour, unlike any you have tasted. It fills your mouth, but not your hunger. In a place much like this one, the stranger begins, there was a village where the people lived by the bread they baked. They woke each morning to the smell of rising dough, and by the time the sun reached the treetops, the ovens glowed with the heat of their hope. Bread was not just food, it was their faith, their comfort, their common bond. He pauses, his eyes fixed on the flame of the lantern. But over time, the people changed. Small quarrels grew into grudges, old friendships frayed. Each began to count his own loaves, to wonder whether his neighbor's slice was thicker, whether someone else was eating more than their share. They blamed bad harvests, they blamed the weather, they blamed strangers, but never themselves. He looks at you, and his gaze is suddenly sharp. One day, the bread stopped feeding them. No matter how much they baked or ate, the emptiness only grew. They prayed, they pleaded, they searched for culprits, but all the while, the hunger was only a shadow of their own hearts. You swallow, finding no comfort in the story. So what did they do? The stranger's smile fades. Some left, some starved, some turned against each other, until the village was little more than a memory. But a few remembered something important: that bread means nothing if not shared, that a meal is only a meal when eaten together. He slides the other half of the loaf toward you. Hunger, you see, is not always a punishment. Sometimes it is a lesson. You stare at the bread, at the stranger, at the flickering shadows on the wall. The room feels suddenly too small, the air too close. Why are you here? You ask, voice barely above a whisper. He studies you for a long moment, to remind you, or to witness what you choose to become. Outside, the rain begins to fall, soft and steady. Inside, the only sound is your own breathing and the faint crackle of the lantern. You eat another bite, not because you are hungry, but because the ritual is all you have left. When you finally leave, the sky is darker, the road slick with mud. The stranger's words linger with you, echoing through your thoughts like the taste of unfamiliar bread. You do not know what lesson you are meant to learn, or if there is still time to learn it. All you know is that the hunger feels no different than before, except, perhaps, that now it carries a new weight, as if it is asking you a question you are still not ready to answer. There are stories in every village about people who are not quite what they seem, travelers who know too much, old women with two shadows, children born with eyes that do not match. In the old days, you listened politely and forgot the tales by morning, comforted by the weight of your own common sense. But hunger has a way of eroding certainty, and lately, even the most skeptical villagers find themselves glancing twice at puddles, at dark corners, at the faces of those they thought they knew. Since your night in the stranger's hut, the world feels thinner, as if you are living too close to something you cannot see. The bread in your hand feels heavier, the silence in your house louder. You watch your neighbors with new suspicion and catch them watching you the same way. Each of you is waiting for someone else to break, to confess, to explain the reason for all this emptiness. One night, restless and unable to sleep, you rise and step outside. The air is cold and damp, heavy with the promise of another hungry morning. In the distance, the woods huddle close, dark and silent, and the moon is a sliver barely enough to see by. You hear voices, low and urgent, coming from the stranger's hovel. Your feet carry you without thinking. You move quietly, the way children do when they hope not to be seen. As you draw closer, you see a faint light leaking from beneath the warped door. You pause, heart racing, and hear the stranger speaking, not alone, but in conversation with someone whose voice you do not recognize. The words are not in any language you know. They slip between the boards, strange and sinuous, the sounds cold as metal and warm as bread, all at once. You press your ear to the crack and shiver as you catch fragments of meaning, hunger, spirit, emptiness, balance. You peer through a knothole in the wood. Inside, the stranger sits across from a figure that flickers in and out of sight. Sometimes it seems like a woman, sometimes a bundle of rags, sometimes a shadow cast by no fire. The stranger's face is solemn, almost tender, and his eyes shine with a light that is not from the lantern. I told you, the shadow whispers, her voice slipping into your mind like water through a sieve. They are not ready. They never are, the stranger replies, and his voice is sad. But hunger teaches what comfort forgets. They must remember what it is to be whole. The shadow's laugh is both cruel and kind. If they cannot, will you stay? The stranger shakes his head. No one stays. We walk, we watch, we witness. When the lesson is learned or lost, we move on. For a moment, he glances toward the door, and you are sure he sees you. His eyes are too clear, too deep, and you feel exposed. But he does not call out or betray your presence. Instead, the stranger stands. The shadow woman dissolves into nothing, the air around her colder and thinner than before. He looks down at the half-eaten loaf on the table and sighs, as if the very act of eating is a burden he can never set aside. You stumble back into the darkness, the knowledge heavy in your chest. You have heard enough old tales to recognize what you have seen: one who walks between worlds, a being neither living nor dead, drawn to places where the balance has been broken. In your village, you now understand the hunger is not just the lack of bread, but the lack of something more essential: connection, honesty, the courage to see each other clearly. The next day, the air in the village is different. You cannot say why. Nothing has changed. Not the weather, not the bread, not the sorrow in people's eyes. Yet you move through the square as though every sound is sharper, every silence more loaded. You notice how people avoid each other's gaze, how Anna no longer opens her bakery in the morning, how Stepan's house remains shuttered tight. You catch Ivan by the well and ask him bluntly what he thinks the stranger is. He laughs too loudly and shakes his head. A troublemaker, nothing more. A curse, maybe, or a ghost. What does it matter? But you see the fear in his eyes, the same fear you now feel: fear of what the stranger might be, and fear of what his presence says about all of you. That evening, as the sun dips low and the shadows stretch across the fields, you spot the stranger standing at the edge of the woods. He is still, almost peaceful, but there is a tension in the line of his shoulders, as if he is preparing to leave. You approach, unsure of what you will say. The stranger turns to you and gives a small, tired smile. "You saw," he says. Not a question. You nod. "I saw." He regards you for a moment, his gaze gentle but relentless. This hunger is not just in your bread, it is in your hearts, your memories, your fears. It cannot be filled by food alone. "What are you?" you ask, the question finally too heavy to keep inside. He considers. "A witness, a reminder, sometimes a warning." You think of the shadow in his hut, of the way he spoke to her, of the way your village has changed since he arrived. "Will you go?" you ask. The stranger shrugs. "That depends. Sometimes leaving is part of the cure. Sometimes staying is." You look down at your hands, at the lines worn into your palms from years of work. "Is there anything we can do?" He is silent for a long time. Then softly, "Remember who you are. Remember what bread was before you feared losing it. The rest is up to you." With that, he turns away, disappearing into the gathering dusk. You stand alone for a while, thinking about what you have seen and heard. The hunger, you realize, is still there, but perhaps, for the first time, it feels less like a curse and more like a riddle waiting to be solved. That night, you dream not of emptiness, but of a long table filled with faces. Some you know, some you have forgotten, some you have never seen. They are all breaking bread together, and for the first time in weeks, you wake with the faint memory of what it means to be full. It is one thing to be hungry in the body. It is another thing entirely to feel that hunger settle in your thoughts, your memories, your sense of yourself. You wake each morning now, not only with your stomach empty, but with a kind of ache behind your eyes, as if some essential part of you has been misplaced in the night. The bread on your table is thinner, harder. The village outside your window is quieter, as if all the noise has drained away, leaving only the echoes of what once was. You go about your chores by habit more than intention, patching a roof tile, fetching water, mending a broken rake handle. But even as you work, your mind circles the stranger's words. Remember who you are. Remember what bread was before you feared losing it. The advice seems simple, almost childish, but the more you try to understand it, the more slippery it becomes. For the first time in weeks, you turn your attention not outward, but inward. You sit by the window and let your mind wander backward. What was your life before the hunger? What did you once believe about yourself, about your neighbors, about the world? You remember the early mornings, still half dark, when your mother would rouse you from sleep and you'd stumble, bleary eyed, to the kitchen. The oven would already be warm and the air thick with the promise of breakfast. You remember your first taste of bread as a child, how you tried to make a single bite last as long as possible, unwilling for the moment to end. Those memories are layered, warm, full of voices and laughter, and the hush of contentment after a meal well shared. But as you follow the thread forward, you begin to see the changes, so gradual at first that you barely noticed. The squabbles over flour, the resentment when Anna's loaves were just a little larger than yours, the way you started counting slices, hoarding crumbs, distrusting your own kin. You remember an argument with a friend over who would receive the last piece of bread at a winter feast. It was nothing, a joke that turned sour, but the bitterness lingered longer than the meal itself. You remember accusing Anna, quietly, of taking more than her share. You remember envying Stepan's good fortune, even as you congratulated him. You see now that the hunger did not begin with the stranger, or even with a bad harvest. It began in small moments, hurt feelings, unspoken slights, little betrayals swept under the rug and forgotten. It crept in like a draft beneath the door, growing stronger as you ignored it. You look at your own hands, how quick they have been to clutch, how slow to give. When did you last offer bread to someone else without worrying what you might lose? When did you last share your hopes, your fears, your dreams without expecting something in return? You wonder if others are having the same thoughts. Does Anna sit behind her shuttered bakery, sifting through memories of easier times? Does Ivan, so quick to anger now, remember a day when he would split his loaf with a neighbor? Does Babushka Praskovia recall what it felt like to comfort a crying child without bitterness or fear? As you ponder, you become aware of something shifting inside you, a faint loosening, as if a knot you have carried for too long is beginning to untie itself. The hunger is still there, but it feels less cruel, less absolute. It is as though you are seeing it for what it is, not a punishment, not a curse, but a signal, a reminder that something needs to change. That night, you sit by the fire with the last of your bread and think about what it might mean to be whole. Is it simply to be full, or is it to be at peace with yourself, to forgive old hurts, to reach out to others not from need, but from hope? You make a decision, small but resolute. Tomorrow, You will speak to Anna, you will apologize. For every slight, real or imagined, you will visit Stepan, bring him what little you can spare, and ask for nothing in return. You will listen to Babushka Praskovia's stories, not for answers, but for the comfort of old words and the memory of what it means to be part of something larger than yourself. As the fire dies and the shadows gather, you feel, just for a moment, the return of a different kind of warmth. It is not enough to fill your belly, but it is enough to fill a corner of your heart. Before you sleep, you whisper a quiet promise to yourself to remember, to reach out, to try again. The night is still long, and hunger is not yet finished with you. But for the first time in many weeks, you believe that morning may bring not just more emptiness, but the faint, fragile hope of change. And you understand, at last, that the real famine is not in the fields or the ovens, but in the spaces you let grow between yourself and those around you. If there is to be an end, it must begin there with a word, a gesture, a piece of bread freely given, no matter how small. The next morning, you wake not to the sound of hunger, but to the uneasy thrill of decision. The world outside remains unchanged, the same colorless sky, the same gray brown mud, the same crow cackling from the bare branch by your window. But inside, something has shifted, a determination, faint and stubborn, like a shoot breaking through frost. You gather the last of your bread and make your way through the quiet lanes, your breath misting before you. Your steps lead you first to Anna's house. You hesitate at her door, hand raised before finally knocking. The sound is small, uncertain. Anna opens the door just wide enough to see you. Her face is drawn, suspicious. The hollowness in her cheeks mirrors your own. You clear your throat, the words sticking, and then speak. Anna, I am sorry for anything I've said, anything I've thought. I know we are all hungry, but I remember a time when you would share your bread without counting. I want to remember that again. For a moment, you think she will close the door in your face. Then her expression softens. We were different once, she murmurs. It is hard to remember how to trust, but I miss it too. She reaches for your hand, hesitantly, as if recalling the gesture from long ago, and you feel the faintest warmth return between you. Encouraged, you move through the village, finding Stepan by the well. He sits alone, his shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the water, as if expecting some answer to surface. You approach him quietly, offering a piece of your bread. I have so little, you admit, but I would rather be hungry with you than eat alone. He looks at you with surprise, suspicion, then relief mingling in his gaze. He takes the bread without a word, but you sit together in companionable silence, the air between you less sharp than it was. As the day unfolds, you see signs, tentative, fragile, that others are following the same instinct. Marfa calls the children to her door, breaking her last apple into slices for them, scolding them for running, but tucking an extra piece into the smallest one's hand. Ivan, famously tight-fisted since the famine began, offers to help mend Grigori's fence, and even manages a crooked smile. Word spreads quietly, not as gossip, but as gentle invitation. By afternoon, a handful of villagers gather near Anna's bakery, awkward and uncertain, each clutching some small thing, a turnip, an onion, a crust, a story. The conversation begins stilted, but soon eases into shared memories, tales of old festivals, of weddings and harvests, of the time the river flooded and everyone slept together in the church, huddled and laughing through the storm. No one knows who suggests it, but soon you are all working together in Anna's kitchen. There is little to spare, but what you have, you combine: bread, a thin soup from dried beans, an old jar of pickles, a pinch of salt. Anna kneads the dough, and this time she does not mutter to herself or cast wary glances over her shoulder. She works slowly, letting others help, guiding clumsy hands with patient instructions. The loaves that emerge are smaller than before, but they are shared without counting. Each person tears off a piece and hands it to another, careful to offer the best bit to someone else. For the first time in what feels like years, you hear laughter, awkward, hesitant, but genuine. Someone tells a joke that falls flat, and you laugh anyway, grateful for the attempt. Babushka Praskovia arrives late, leaning on her cane, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She settles by the oven, her voice crackling. Hunger is stubborn, but so are we. I have seen harder times, and I have seen kindness save what nothing else could. Share what you have, and it may be enough. No one expects a miracle. You do not eat until you are full, but as you pass the bread from hand to hand, you feel the edge of hunger dull. The meal is thin, but the company is rich. Stories and songs, and even, by the end of the night, a promise to meet again tomorrow, to bring what you can, to make the best of it together. Later, as you walk home, you catch sight of the stranger watching from the edge of the square, a faint smile on his lips. He does not speak, but raises a hand in greeting before fading into the shadows. That night, you sleep a little deeper. Your dreams are still tinged with hunger, but they are no longer nightmares. You dream of voices rising in song, of old friends reunited, of tables spread with simple food, shared without fear. When you wake, you know the hunger has not vanished. There is no magic here, no sudden return to plenty, but something in you and in the village has shifted. The spaces between you all, once cold and suspicious, are a little warmer. The bread, though meager, sits easier in your belly. For the first time in a long while, you look forward to the day ahead, not because it promises fullness, but because it promises company, hope, and the faint beginning of repair. The changes do not happen all at once. There is no fanfare, no sudden chorus of bells, no feast descending from heaven to fill the village tables. Instead, what arrives is quieter, a gradual easing, a softening at the edges of things that, at first, you barely dare to trust. The mornings are still cold. The sky is still low and heavy, and the bread is still hard enough to chip a tooth if you are careless. But the sense of isolation that hung over the village has begun to thin. People leave their houses with less hesitation, doors left ajar for a moment longer, voices carrying farther across the square. You notice Anna's window is open again, her face visible as she sweeps the sill and waves to the children passing by. You meet your neighbors with a cautious greeting, uncertain whether the new kindness will hold. But when you offer it, you find it returned. Marfa presses a withered carrot into your palm with a gruff, "You need it more than I do." Grigori invites you to share the last of his salted fish, a delicacy he has been saving for a special occasion. Even Ivan, who once would have cursed the sun for rising on an empty stomach, helps you lift a heavy bucket from the well, grumbling only a little. Each day, someone suggests a new reason to gather. Sometimes it is to pool food, sometimes just to talk, to tell stories, or to sing the old songs that have nearly faded from memory. The first few times, the gatherings are small and awkward, but the routine grows familiar. The hunger does not vanish, but it becomes less sharp, more like a background hum than the main event. It is at one of these gatherings, sitting around Anna's battered table, that you first notice a change in the bread itself. Anna passes around the evening's offering, a small loaf, still steaming, with a thin crust and a heavy crumb. You break off a piece and, almost absent mindedly, bring it to your mouth. The first bite is unremarkable, but then something shifts. A fleeting sense of warmth, a faint taste that lingers, as if some hidden note in the flavor is trying to make itself known. You pause, uncertain whether to believe it. Is it just hope? Is it just hunger playing tricks? You take another bite. This time, the taste is clearer, a hint of sweetness, the memory of something familiar. You look around the table and see the others pausing as well, chewing slowly, puzzled, and almost afraid to comment. Anna is the first to break the silence. "Does it taste different to anyone?" she asks, tentative, as if afraid the question itself might break the spell. Marfa nods, her eyes wide. "It is not much, but it is better. I have not tasted anything for weeks, and now—" She shrugs, unwilling to say more, but you see a hint of color return to her cheeks. Someone laughs, softly, and then you laugh too, relief mixing with disbelief. It is not a miracle, but it is something. The loaf is gone in moments, shared without argument, each crumb cherished not for its bulk, but for its promise. In the days that follow, you notice the pattern repeating. The bread does not always taste sweet. Sometimes it is simply less bland, less heavy. Sometimes it seems to satisfy you a little more. The change is small, but it is real, and it gives you something to look forward to each morning. The villagers notice it too, though most are careful not to speak too soon. Superstition dies hard, and no one wants to tempt fate. Still, the stories begin to shift. Instead of rumors about curses and spirits, you hear talk of gratitude, of plans for the coming spring, of ways to prepare for the next hard season together. Babushka Praskovia, always watching, claims to know why. "It is not the bread itself," she says, sitting by the fire with her shawl wrapped tight. "It is you. The spirit of the oven listens. It always has. When you bake with hope, with forgiveness, with care for one another, well, even the simplest loaf remembers. You do not know whether to believe her. You are not sure it matters. You try to keep the new habits alive. You break bread with others, even if you have only a crust. You find reasons to talk to neighbors you once avoided. You listen to the old stories with more patience and tell a few of your own. The empty places in your days fill, little by little, not with food, but with something you realize you had missed almost as much. Sometimes, late at night, you think of the stranger. He is still in the village, though he keeps to the margins, watching, waiting, perhaps measuring the change in the air. You wonder if he is satisfied by what he sees, or if he will soon move on, taking his riddles and his quiet hunger elsewhere. One evening, you catch sight of him at the far edge of the square. You raise a hand, unsure if he will notice. He nods, a gesture so slight you might almost miss it, and then slips away, as if content to let the village find its own way now. You go home, your belly still not full, but your heart a little less hollow. That night, as you drift into sleep, you dream of bread, not the empty, tasteless bread of the last weeks, but the bread of your childhood, warm and fragrant, and shared at a crowded table. And though you wake hungry, it is a different kind of hunger now, a hunger for morning, for community, for one more day together. The change in the village is as subtle as the turning of a season, a quiet, gradual warming that is only obvious when you look back. There is no single day when the hunger ends, no moment when the bread becomes a feast and the troubles are swept away. But with every shared loaf, every unguarded laugh, every awkward apology, something begins to mend. It is during this uncertain spring that you realize you have not seen the stranger in several days. At first, you think nothing of it. He was always a figure at the edge of things, a shadow at the corner of your eye, drifting between the trees or lingering near the old well. It is easy, almost natural, to forget his presence once the routines of village life begin to reassert themselves. But as the days pass, you become aware of his absence, a gap, not just in the village, but in your thoughts, as if a song has faded out mid verse and left only the echo. You mention it to Anna one morning over bread that is almost, but not quite, satisfying. She pauses, then nods. I saw him on the hill a few evenings ago. He watched the sunset, then turned and walked into the forest. I thought he might come back, but, well, perhaps he is finished with us. You look for him, out of habit as much as curiosity. You check the old hovel, but it stands empty, swept clean, as if no one ever lived there at all. The hearth is cold. There are no footprints in the mud, though the ground is still soft from the last rain. Even the children, who once threw stones at his door and dared each other to peek inside, find nothing to gossip about. The village, for a few days, seems restless again, uneasy without the presence of its scapegoat, its mystery. Some are relieved. Ivan declares with bluster that the curse is broken. Marfa wonders aloud if they should have thanked him, but quickly drops the subject when no one else agrees. You walk the edge of the woods that evening, following the path where you last saw him. There are tracks in the undergrowth, odd, wide boot prints, not quite like any you have seen before. The marks lead away from the village, deeper into the trees, then disappear entirely in a patch of wild garlic and violets. For a moment, you feel a pang, not quite loss, not quite relief, but something in between. As the sun sets, you return to the square where Anna and a few others have gathered, their voices low but more hopeful than they have been in weeks. The children play again, their laughter rising and falling like bird song. Someone brings out a battered accordion, and for the first time since winter, there is music. The bread is passed around, thinner than ever, but nobody complains. You notice something odd near the center of the square, a scrap of cloth caught on a fence post, dark blue and rough woven, the kind the stranger wore. Tucked into its fold is a slip of parchment, scribbled in a hand both delicate and sharp. You turn it over and read. Hunger is a teacher, not a curse. What is shared is never truly lost. There is no signature, but you know it is meant for you and for the whole village. You pass the note to Anna, who reads it with a faint, wry smile. He was always strange, she says, but perhaps not so unkind. As night settles over the village, you find yourself standing in the center of it all, surrounded by neighbors who are slowly becoming friends again. You remember the fear and suspicion, the coldness and the loss, but now these things seem less important than the fragile warmth growing between you all. In the days that follow, the story of the stranger's visit changes as it is retold. Some say he was a ghost, others a spirit, others just a wandering wise man with a talent for finding trouble. The children invent games in which they play at being the stranger, pretending to cure imaginary hungers with imaginary bread. Marfa swears she saw him one last time at the river, skipping stones across the water, but no one believes her, and she does not mind. You think of him often, not as a villain nor as a hero, but as someone who came and left a question behind. The hunger is not entirely gone, but it is lessened. You eat a little less than before, but you feel it more. The bread, when broken and shared, carries a taste you had forgotten, gratitude, or perhaps simply attention. Sometimes, late at night, you imagine you hear his staff tapping at the edge of the village. Sometimes, in your dreams, he sits beside you at the table, silent and watchful, waiting to see what you will do next. But mostly, you remember his last words and find yourself repeating them as you rise each morning. What is shared is never truly lost. You do not know if he will ever return. You suspect that he is already part of another story, another village, another hunger. But as you watch the dawn creep over the fields, you are content, if not full, then at least nourished by something harder to name. And this, you think, is enough. Time moves forward, as it always does, with or without your permission. The village settles into a new rhythm, one neither entirely old nor completely new, but patched together from memory, necessity, and a slow, wary hope. The crisis of hunger is no longer the defining note in every conversation, but it leaves its mark, a faint aftertaste on every loaf, a lesson shadowing every gesture of kindness. Each morning, you wake and breathe in the smells of earth and smoke and bread, the last of which is once again fragrant, though you will never mistake it for what it was before. Sometimes, as you slice into your loaf, you find yourself waiting for disappointment, but more often now, what you feel is gratitude, tentative but persistent. The villagers go about their work, repairing fences, planting seeds, patching roofs. They complain, as they always did, about the weather, the price of grain, the laziness of neighbors, but their complaints carry less bitterness. The wounds of the long hunger do not vanish, but they heal, scarring over as reminders. You notice that people look each other in the eye again, not in search of secrets, but in quiet greeting. Anna's bakery has become a meeting place once more. She bakes smaller loaves, careful with her flour, but she always sets one aside for someone who might come late or who has nothing to trade. Children run errands, bringing bread to old Babushka Praskovia, who now sits by her window, dispensing advice that sometimes sounds like riddles, but more often like simple kindness. You yourself have become a different kind of villager, though the change is hard to describe. You are slower to anger, quicker to offer what little you have, more attentive to the people around you. You remember the long days of emptiness, and you recognize the first flickers of hunger in others, not just for bread, but for comfort, for laughter, for belonging. When you feel the ache return, you know better than to let it turn you inward. Instead, you seek out a neighbor, a story, a shared meal, even if all you can offer is a cup of water and the memory of better days. In the evenings, the square fills with soft conversation, old songs, and sometimes even music. Grigory has taught the children to play a tune on his battered accordion, and Ivan, for all his bluster, is coaxed into joining the singing. The stories that are told now are different from before. They do not skirt the darkness, but fold it into the telling, laughing at old superstitions, mourning what was lost, marveling at the strange guest who came and went like a winter storm. When you are alone, you find yourself reflecting on what fullness means. Once it was simple, bread and sleep, and the certainty that tomorrow would be much like today. Now you understand that fullness is more complicated, fragile, and precious. It is the feeling of warm bread shared across a rough table, of trust rebuilt one small act at a time, of silence that holds not suspicion, but peace. Sometimes you walk to the edge of the forest and stand in the fading light, searching for any sign of the stranger's return. You never see him, but you do not feel disappointment. You know now that the hunger he brought was not a punishment, nor the bread he left a cure. It was the space between people, narrowed by fear, widened again by forgiveness, that needed to be filled. The memory of the stranger becomes a story you tell, though you do so sparingly, aware that every listener will hear something different in the telling. Some days you wonder if he was ever real, or only a shadow conjured by your own longing for change. But when you see Anna's smile, or the children's games in the square, or the way even Ivan sits quietly during a meal, you decide that real or not, he has left his mark. Seasons turn, the fields green and ripen. There are lean times still, but they are met together, not alone. The lessons of the long hunger are not easily forgotten. Share what you have. Remember your neighbors. Leave a little bread on the sill for whoever may come. As for you, you are changed. You no longer measure your days only by how full your stomach feels, but by how connected you are to those around you, by the kindness you give and the care you accept. The bread is good, never perfect, never endless, but good enough. And every evening, as you break your loaf, you feel a quiet, persistent gratitude for the bread, for the company, for the hunger that taught you what it truly means to be full.